The letter arrived on a Tuesday in the rain. The kind of rain that finds its way through the crack under the front door, leaving small pools on the beige carpet that Sarah cleaned every week. She was drinking coffee. Alone. Always alone now. It had been 3 months since Michael died. 3 months since that call from the hospital at 2 a.m. Heart attack. Fast. No warning. No goodbye. Nothing. The letter came from a man in a blue uniform who barely made eye contact. He placed it directly in her hands, not in the mailbox, but literally in her hands, like he needed to witness that she had received it. Like he already knew this would change everything. Signature here, he said, pointing with a cheap pen. Sarah signed. Her name came out mechanical now. The way it does when you write the same word so many times it stops feeling real. The envelope was white. Corporate. Cold. She opened it while her coffee went cold. The mug balanced on her thigh, leaving a circle of heat on her gray sweatpants. The same pants she'd been wearing for days. Maybe a week. She couldn't remember the last time she'd changed clothes. Dear Ms. Hutchins, this letter is notification that you are a co-signatory on the following accounts. She read the first line 3 times before her brain processed it. Co-signatory. She wasn't a co-signatory on anything. Michael handled the finances. He always had. From the beginning. Let me take care of this, honey, he used to say, with that smile that made her feel safe. You don't need to worry about these boring things. She kept reading. Visa signature card, $8,400 in arrears. MasterCard, $12,600 in arrears. Personal loan from First Citizens Bank, $34,200 in arrears. Home equity line of credit, $58,000 in arrears. She stopped reading. Her hands began to shake. The coffee cup fell from her lap and shattered on the floor. The brown liquid spreading across the white tile like blood at a crime scene. $113,000. Just in those first items. And there was more. There were entire lines she couldn't read because her vision was starting to blur, that strange flickering that happens when you're about to faint. Sarah breathed. Breathed again. The world came back. The tick of the clock on the wall. The sound of rain on the window. A siren 3 blocks away. She stood up slowly. Very slowly. Her knees made noise, a sound she'd never noticed before. Like glass cracking inside capsules. She walked to the living room. To Michael's desk. That desk nobody had touched since the funeral. His smell was still there, leather and Tom Ford and coffee. She inhaled deeply, like she could smell him back to life. The drawers were locked. She opened them. Documents. Entire stacks of documents. Bank statements she'd never seen. Credit card statements. Overdue notices. Legal letters. Everything printed, everything opened, everything read by him. Everything hidden from her. She sat on the floor. She literally collapsed onto the floor next to the desk, the letter still in her hands. Sarah was 48 years old. She'd worked in human resources for 22 years. She had a daughter in college and Lily, her girl, her everything, at Georgetown studying political science. She had a house in Arlington. She had a 2019 Honda Odyssey. She had a retirement account with $187,000 in it. She had what she thought was a life. What she didn't have was answers. What she didn't have was her husband. What she definitely didn't have was $140,000 to pay for a debt she didn't know existed. She sat there on the hardwood floor for 2 hours. The rain stopped. The sun came out, cutting through the window in thick, judgmental rays that showed every speck of dust in the room. Sarah didn't move. She just held the letter. She read it again. And again. And again, like the numbers might change if she stared hard enough. They didn't change. Around 3 p.m., she called her daughter. Lily didn't answer. She was in class probably. Or the library. Lily was always studying. Lily was going to be somebody. Sarah had made sure of that. She'd picked up extra shifts at work, had skipped her own vacations, had put college funds in an account labeled Lily's Future since the girl was born. Michael had always supported it. He'd always said yes. He'd always smiled and nodded and told her what a good mother she was. What a good mother she was. Sarah left a voicemail. "Hi baby, it's Mom. Just checking in. Call me back when you get a chance. Love you." She didn't mention the letter. She didn't mention the money. She didn't mention that everything was falling apart because her dead husband had apparently decided to bury her alive with him. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. The screen glowed. She logged into their joint checking account. The one she used for groceries and gas and occasionally splurging on nice coffee from the place downtown. The one she never really paid close attention to because Michael handled the major finances. Michael handled everything. The balance was $4,200. That wasn't right. That should have been higher. She clicked to the savings account. She knew they had savings. They had to have savings. A house, a daughter in college, you had savings. $0. She stared at that number. 0.00. It looked like a joke. Like the website was malfunctioning. She clicked to their home equity line. That was the one she knew they had. Michael had taken it out 3 years ago to refinance some things. He hadn't given her the details. She hadn't asked. He'd handled it. He'd handled everything. $2,000 available. Out of $60,000. That meant they'd used $58,000 of the home equity line. The same amount that appeared on that official letter. The same amount she apparently owed. She opened a new tab and searched what happens when a spouse dies with debt. The results were like reading a horror novel written specifically for her. Spousal liability. Community property states. Executor responsibilities. Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. Creditor rights. Probate. Sarah had never heard most of these terms. They were English words, technically, but they formed sentences that didn't make sense to her. Like someone had taken a language she knew and rearranged all the letters. She searched, "Can creditors come after surviving spouse?" The answer was yes. Depending on where you lived. Where you lived mattered. Where you lived determined if you were trapped or just partially trapped. They lived in Virginia. Community property didn't apply. But the home equity line was in her name too. The Visa card was in her name too. And when Michael had died, he'd had no will, no document saying who got what or who owed what, so everything just landed on her. Everything. The house, the debt, the responsibility, the shame. She closed the laptop. The kitchen was very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when you stop breathing normally. When your lungs get shallow and fast and you start to feel like maybe you're drowning in air. Sarah put her hand on her chest. Her heart was going too fast. Too hard. Like it was trying to escape through her ribs. She stood up. She walked to the living room. She sat on the couch she and Michael had picked out together at a furniture store in Arlington 7 years ago. He'd sat in it first. He'd turned to her and said, "This one. Buy this one. I can see us sitting here." And she had. She'd bought it. Because he wanted it. Because what he wanted was what mattered. The couch was gray. It had a small stain on one cushion from when Lily had spilled red wine on it last Christmas. They'd laughed about it. They'd used that spray stuff and it had mostly come out. Not completely. Never completely. Sarah lay down on that couch. She pulled her knees up to her chest. She closed her eyes. In that position of fetal, broken, defeated, she finally let herself cry. Not the polite crying you do at funerals when people are watching. Not the tears you shed quickly so you can compose yourself and be strong. This was the kind of crying that comes from the very bottom, that shakes your entire body, that sounds like an animal in pain. She cried because her husband was dead. She cried because she was angry at her dead husband. She cried because she didn't know him at all. The next morning, she called a lawyer. His name was Richard Chen. He had a small practice in Rosslyn, and she found him through the Virginia State Bar website. She chose him because he specialized in family law and debt, and he answered his phone on the third ring, and his voice was kind. "I'll be honest with you," he said after she explained everything. "This is complex. The good news is you're not responsible for debts he took out solely in his name. But the home equity line, that's jointly held?" "Yes." "And you didn't know about the debt?" "No." "Did you ever sign anything? Any paperwork for these accounts?" Sarah felt her stomach drop. She tried to remember. Had she signed things? Of course she'd signed things. During the mortgage process, at the bank, various moments. How was she supposed to remember what she'd signed when Michael had brought her documents? He'd always said, "Just sign here," and pointed, and she'd signed. She was his wife. He was her husband. Why would she not trust him? "I'm not sure," she said. "Okay. I'm going to need you to bring me every piece of documentation you can find. Every statement, every letter, everything. We're going to go through it. We're going to look at what's actually yours and what you can argue isn't your responsibility." "But Sarah, I want to be clear, this is going to be a process. This is not going to be simple." After they hung up, she spent the rest of the day pulling documents out of Michael's desk. She found an accordion folder, cream-colored, thick, and inside was everything. Every statement from the last 10 years. She saw his handwriting on some of them. Calculations. Numbers. Dates circled in red. He had tracked it all. He had known. She looked at a statement from 2019. The Visa card showed a balance of $4,200. By 2021, it was $8,000. By 2023, it was $12,600. The trajectory was clear. It was purposeful. It was intentional. Someone doesn't accidentally accumulate that kind of debt. Someone doesn't accidentally hide it from their spouse for years. Sarah sat on the floor of Michael's office, his actual office, with the oak desk and the leather chair and the paintings of sailing ships on the wall, and something inside her cracked further. Not emotionally. Structurally. Like a fault line opening inside her chest. This wasn't just debt. This wasn't just a secret. This was a choice. He had made a choice. Every month, for years, he had chosen not to tell her. He had chosen to keep this from her. He had chosen to let it grow and compound and become this monster that was now eating her alive. She picked up her phone and texted Lily, "Can you call me tonight? Something's happened." Lily called back within 5 minutes. That was Lily. Always there. Always attentive. "Mom? Are you okay?" Sarah heard the fear in her daughter's voice and felt a surge of guilt so intense she almost hung up. "I'm fine. I'm okay. It's just, your father didn't tell me about some debts. Some significant debts. And I'm dealing with it, but I wanted you to know that I'm dealing with it and I don't want you to worry about school or anything, do you understand? Your education is not affected." There was a long silence. "How much debt?" Lily asked. "A lot. Mom. I know." "Like, how much?" "Around $140,000. Another silence. Sarah could imagine her daughter's face, the way her eyebrows would come together, the way she'd bite her lip when she was thinking hard about something. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to hire a lawyer and I'm going to figure it out." Okay, Lily said, and her voice was older suddenly. When had her voice become that old? When had her daughter become the one doing the reassuring? Okay, Mom. You're going to figure it out. And if you need me, I'm here. I'm coming home next weekend anyway. I'll be there. After they hung up, Sarah realized that Lily hadn't asked any other questions. She hadn't demanded details or blamed Michael or made it about herself. She had just said, okay. You're going to figure it out. Maybe she knew something Sarah didn't. Maybe she knew that her mother was capable of things she hadn't discovered yet. Maybe she knew that there was a version of Sarah underneath all this devastation that was actually strong. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah met with Richard Chen 3 times. They went through the documents methodically. Some of the debt, he explained, would fall to the estate. But the home equity line, the cards with both names on them, the personal loan where she co-signed, those were her responsibility. How much of it? She asked. Probably around $85,000 to $90,000 of the total. She did the math in her head. Her current salary was $67,000 a year. Even if she took 0 other expenses, 0 food, 0 utilities, 0 emergencies, it would take her over a year to pay just the debt. And that was before interest. The interest was astronomical. The credit cards were charging her 22%. The home equity line was variable. One card had a late fee of $35 added monthly. The numbers kept growing. There might be something, Richard said during their 3rd meeting. If you can prove that he acted with gross negligence or fraud, taking out these debts while hiding them from you, which could be construed as marital fraud, we might be able to argue some of it away. How do we prove that? We look for patterns. We look at communication. Did he ever tell you about these debts? Did he ever try to hide accounts from you? Did he have secret credit cards? Secret accounts? Sarah nodded slowly. She remembered now. She remembered little things that seemed small at the time but suddenly looked enormous. The American Express card that would arrive sometimes addressed to Michael Hutchins, but never to Michael and Sarah Hutchins. She'd asked him about it once and he'd said it was just a business card. She hadn't needed to ask more. The password-protected phone that he kept with him always. She joked about it once, "What are you hiding, honey?" And he'd laughed and said it was just work stuff, sensitive projects. She'd believed him. The way he'd handle the mail first, every day, sorting through it at the kitchen counter before leaving it on the counter for her. She'd never thought to ask why. It seemed normal. It seemed like just what he did. But it wasn't normal. It was deliberate. It was control. "I think I have what you need," she said. Over the next week, she organized everything. Every statement, every late notice, every piece of mail that had come to the house with his name on it. She found a credit card with a $4,800 balance that she'd never known existed. She found evidence that he'd been making minimum payments on the cards, sometimes late, usually right before due dates, like he was just barely keeping it from exploding. She found a handwritten note in his desk that said, "Figure out solution before Lily's graduation." Lily's graduation was 3 years away from when he'd written that note. Sarah held that note in her hands for a very long time. "I think he knew," she told Richard. "Knew what?" "That something was wrong. That he was sick. I think that's why he was thinking about Lily's graduation. Like he was trying to make sure things were handled before something happened." Richard leaned back in his chair. He was probably in his 60s, with gray hair and the kind of face that had seen a lot of human suffering. Did he ever mention health concerns? No. But he was going to doctors more. I remember that now. He'd say he was going to his cardiologist for a checkup. He'd say things like, "Just making sure the ticker is still working." He'd laugh about it. How often was he going to doctors? I don't know. Every few months maybe? I wasn't paying attention. He made the appointments, he went, he came back. I never asked. Richard pulled out a legal pad. He wrote something down. I need you to get his medical records. If we can prove he knew he was at risk for a cardiac event, that he was under treatment for heart disease or high-risk factors, that changes things. That changes a lot of things. It took 3 weeks to get the medical records, but they arrived in a thick manila folder. Sarah sat at her kitchen table and read through them. Her hands shook as she did. Michael had been seeing a cardiologist for 2 years. 2 years. His last visit had been 3 weeks before he died. The notes said, patient advised of significant risk factors. Discussed lifestyle modifications and medication compliance. Patient seemed somewhat resistant to aggressive intervention. There was a letter from the cardiologist dated 8 months before Michael's death. It said, given the patient's current cardiac profile and risk factors, I would recommend he consider his long-term planning, including financial and legal matters. Current risk assessment suggests he is at moderate to high risk for major cardiac event within the next 2 to 5 years. Sarah read that letter 17 times. She counted. 17 times. He knew. He absolutely knew. She called Richard. Bring those to my office, he said. Today if you can. She did. She left work early, she told her boss she had a family emergency, which was technically true, and drove to Roslyn with the folder of medical records. Richard read through them carefully. He took notes. He made phone calls to other lawyers. He called a financial expert. He was building something. She could see it happening in real time. Here's what I think happened, he said after about an hour. I think he knew he was dying. I think he came to terms with his own mortality. And instead of telling you, instead of preparing you, instead of being a partner in this crisis, he decided to deal with it the way he dealt with everything, by making decisions for you and hiding them from you. Sarah felt something inside her explode. Not anger exactly. Something bigger. Something that felt like betrayal and pain and rage all mixed together. So what do I do? We argue marital fraud. We argue that he deliberately concealed material information from you that affected your financial security. We argue that he put you in this position knowingly. We argue that in doing so, he breached his fiduciary duty to you as a spouse. Now, we might not win on everything, but we can probably negotiate down what you owe. Negotiate with who? He's dead. With his estate. With the estate executor. With the creditors. This is complex, but it's not impossible. It took 4 months of legal battles. 4 months of phone calls and letters and negotiations. 4 months of Sarah showing up to work and pretending everything was fine while her world was being dissected and analyzed in attorneys' offices and courtrooms. The creditors, it turned out, had a lot more to lose than she did. If they started pursuing the estate aggressively, if they tried to attach the house, they'd take a big loss. It was better for them to settle. It was better for them to accept reduced payments over time. By the time everything was finalized, Sarah's debt had been reduced to $67,000. Still astronomical. Still impossible feeling. But manageable if she got aggressive about it. If she took overtime. If she cut everything extra from her life. If she made this her project for the next 3 to 5 years. She could do that. The house was hers. The car was hers. The life insurance policy, which she'd completely forgotten about until Richard mentioned it, had a death benefit of $100,000. She could use that to pay down the debt significantly. By October, 6 months after Michael died, Sarah had paid $50,000 of the remaining $67,000. She was working 60-hour weeks. She'd picked up a consulting gig on weekends. She'd taken out a second job at a local nonprofit doing part-time HR work. She was exhausted in a way that seemed to go to her bones. But she was also alive. One Tuesday evening, after one of her consulting calls ended, she sat at the kitchen table, not Michael's desk anymore, but her own table, her own space, and she realized something. She realized that during these months, she'd been so focused on the debt, on the money, on the mechanics of betrayal, that she hadn't actually stopped to process what had happened. She'd been surviving. Now it was time to actually feel it. She cried that night, but it was different from the crying on the couch 3 months earlier. This was sadder. This was the crying of someone who has realized that the man she married had decided that his own fear was more important than her security. That he'd chosen to carry his burden alone and leave her to carry it after he was gone. She cried for the years they had together that now looked different to her. They weren't warm anymore. They weren't safe. They were built on a foundation of lies so thorough that she questioned whether she'd known him at all. She cried for the version of herself that trusted too easily. And then she stopped crying. She got up. She washed her face. She made a list of everything she still owed and everything she could do to fix it. By November, she'd paid off the remaining debt. It was done. She'd taken the life insurance money, the consulting payments, the overtime, and she'd paid it all off. Every single penny. The last payment was $3,200. She made it online, on her laptop, watching the balance go from $3,200 to $0. She watched it for 5 minutes. She watched it like watching it might make it change back. Make it all real again. It didn't change. She called Lily and told her. "Oh my God, Mom," Lily said. "That's incredible. Do you know that? That's incredible." "I know," Sarah said. And she did know. She knew that what she'd done was extraordinary. She knew that most people would have declared bankruptcy. Most people would have had to give up the house. Most people would have been buried by this. She hadn't. She'd fought. She'd worked. She'd sacrificed. And she'd won. The next morning, Sarah woke up and realized she was someone different. She was no longer Michael's widow. She was no longer a woman hiding from bad news. She was no longer pretending to be smaller than she actually was. She was a woman who had faced the worst of her husband, the deepest betrayal, the most profound lie, and she'd not only survived it, she'd erased it. She had reclaimed her life. She went to work that day and asked her boss for a meeting. They sat in a small conference room with a window that looked out over Arlington. "I've been thinking," she said. "I want to transition into managing the financial planning department. I want to lead trainings on debt and personal finance. I want to help people understand their money and their responsibilities so that what happened to me doesn't happen to them." Her boss looked surprised. "That's a pretty significant role." "I know. And I'm ready for it. I'm more than ready." By December, she'd started in the new position. She was making $85,000 a year now. She had benefits and a 401k with matching, and for the first time in a very long time, she had room to breathe. She bought flowers for her kitchen table. She let herself sleep until 7 on weekends instead of waking up in panic at 4 a.m. She smiled at people without worrying about what they might see. On the 1-year anniversary of Michael's death, she took a day off. She didn't go to work. She didn't take on any consulting projects. She sat on her back porch with a cup of coffee and watched the birds in the garden. She thought about Michael. She thought about the man she'd married and the man he actually was. She thought about the ways in which we can live with people and not really know them. The ways we can build whole lives on fragments of trust. She thought about anger and grief and the way they sit together in your chest until one day you realize one of them has left. She wasn't sad anymore. She wasn't even angry anymore. She was just quiet. She was just present. She was just a woman on a porch in Arlington drinking coffee and being alive and being grateful that she was alive. The life she had now was different from the one she'd imagined. It was harder in some ways. But it was truly hers. It wasn't built on someone else's lies. It wasn't dependent on someone else's deception. It was something she'd built herself, with her own hands, with her own choices. And that meant something. That meant everything.